Let me give you a number. $20 million. That is the reported value of the exclusive podcast deal that Spotify signed with Meghan Markle's Archwell audio production company back in 2021. $20 million. For a podcast. From a streaming platform that was, at that very moment, betting everything on the idea that the Duchess of Sussex, freshly departed from the royal family, freshly installed in a Montecito mansion, freshly signed to a Netflix deal reportedly worth $100 million alongside Prince Harry, was one of the most commercially bankable names on the planet Earth. The podcast was called Archetypes. It ran for one season, 12 episodes. And in the summer of 2023, Spotify and Archwell Audio parted ways. No second season, no renewal. No graceful creative pivot. No dignified farewell statement that made the separation sound like anything other than what it was. Gone. And here is the part that nobody in the Sussex communications operation could spin, could manage, could reframe, or could make disappear with a carefully worded statement to a sympathetic outlet. A Spotify executive, not a blogger, not a tabloid, not some anonymous bitter source whispering into a journalist's ear, but a named, identified, senior Spotify executive was reported to have described the Sussex deal in terms that became immediately, brutally, and permanently viral. 2 words. Fucking grifters. 2 words. $20 million. 1 cancelled podcast. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was not the end of the story. That was barely the beginning. Because what followed in 2024 and into 2025 was not a recovery. It was not a pivot. It was not the triumphant, carefully choreographed second act that the Sussex communications machine had been promising was just around the corner, just over the horizon, just weeks away from landing and silencing every critic who had ever doubted them. What followed was something far more revealing, far more consequential, and far more uncomfortable for everyone involved. What followed was the story of a woman who walked away from the most recognizable, most powerful, most deeply embedded brand in the history of the modern world, the British royal family, and discovered, in real time, in full public view, with every stumble documented and dissected and archived for posterity, that building something capable of replacing it is almost impossibly hard. Tonight, we follow the money, we follow the strategy, we follow the decisions, and we follow, with forensic precision, exactly where all of it stopped working. Now, before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, if someone sent you this video, if the algorithm dropped you here and you are not yet sure whether to stay, I want you to do something right now. Hit the like button. Hit subscribe. Because what I am about to walk you through is not the version of this story that the tabloids tell. It is not the version that the Sussex PR team tells. It is the version that the numbers tell. And the numbers, as we are about to discover, are not kind. Right, let us get into it. To understand why the commercial collapse of the Sussex brand matters, why does something far beyond celebrity gossip, far beyond the petty warfare of royal watching, far beyond the usual noise of who said what to whom at which palace gathering, you need to understand what the Sussex strategy was actually built on, what it was designed to do, what it was fundamentally promising to deliver. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in early 2020, a moment they announced with considerable confidence and not inconsiderable PR polish, in a statement that blindsided Buckingham Palace and sent royal correspondents into a state of barely contained hysteria. They made a very specific promise. They intended to become financially independent. They were going to build their own platforms. They were going to use their extraordinary global profile not in service of the crown, not in service of the institution, not in service of a system they had concluded no longer deserved their loyalty, but in service of causes and commercial ventures that they controlled entirely, on their terms, on their timeline, answerable to nobody but themselves. And on paper, genuinely, honestly on paper, That logic was not entirely unreasonable. You could see why they believed it. You could see why, in those early, optimistic months of 2020, sitting in that Montecito mansion with the Pacific coast visible from the garden and the deal offers beginning to arrive in their inbox, they felt that the gamble was going to pay off. Meghan was not simply a member of the royal family who had married into the job. She was a working actress before any of this. She understood entertainment from the inside. She understood how content is made, how it is marketed, how an audience is built and maintained. She had run her own lifestyle blog, The Tig, before her royal years, and it had generated genuine commercial interest, genuine engagement, genuine proof that she could build something independently. And Harry. Harry carried perhaps the most compelling personal narrative of his entire generation. A prince who served 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. A man who lost his mother at 12 years old in the most public, most traumatic, most globally devastating circumstances imaginable. A man who grew up at the absolute epicenter of the most scrutinized family on earth, surrounded by protocol and duty and expectation. And then, and this is the part that made the story commercially irresistible, walked away from all of it. For love, for freedom, for the chance to live a life he had chosen, rather than one that had been chosen for him. That story, packaged correctly, told with the right level of vulnerability and the right level of controlled revelation, was worth enormous sums of money in the modern content economy. Netflix understood it, Spotify understood it, Penguin Random House understood it. The deals arrived fast, and they arrived large. The Netflix documentary Harry and Meghan dropped in December 2022 and was watched by tens of millions of viewers across the globe. Harry's memoir, Spare, published in January 2023, became one of the fastest-selling non-fiction books in British publishing history. Within days of release, it had shifted hundreds of thousands of copies. It was translated into dozens of languages. It dominated the bestseller charts on both sides of the Atlantic. By any surface-level metric you care to apply, the Sussex brand was performing. The numbers looked good. The reach was undeniable. The cultural penetration was real. But underneath those surface metrics, something was wrong. Something that the numbers were obscuring rather than revealing. Something that anybody who had spent time studying how brands are built and sustained, rather than how they are launched, could see developing beneath the glossy exterior. The content was burning through goodwill faster than it was building it. Every Netflix episode, every memoir chapter, every Oprah interview moment, every bombshell claim about unnamed royals and institutional failures and personal betrayals, all of it was drawing on exactly the same finite, non-renewable resource: the drama of their exit from the royal family. And that resource, by 2024, was running critically, measurably, visibly low. The audience had heard the story. They had bought the book. They had watched the documentary. They had absorbed the Oprah interview in that famous moment that stopped the world. They had processed the claims, formed their opinions, chosen their sides. The story had been told. The revelation had been made. The royal wound had been opened and examined in front of the entire planet. And the question that nobody inside the Sussex operation had a fully convincing answer to was the one that was becoming impossible to avoid. What comes next? In early 2024, Meghan announced the launch of a lifestyle brand. Its name was American Riviera Orchard. And I want you to sit with that name for a moment, because it is genuinely important. American Riviera Orchard. It evokes Santa Barbara sunshine. It evokes farmers markets on warm Saturday mornings. It evokes the kind of effortless, abundant, golden California lifestyle that plays absolutely beautifully in aspirational content. The kind of content that lands perfectly on Instagram, that resonates on Pinterest, that speaks to a demographic that aspires to a version of curated, wholesome, elevated living. The brand was being positioned, quite deliberately, in the territory occupied by Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop. Wellness, food, homeware. The aesthetics of a life lived with exquisite attention to detail and absolutely no visible effort. The launch strategy was carefully constructed. A select, curated group of celebrity friends, Mindy Kaling among them, Chrissy Teigen among them, receive branded jars of jam. Strawberry jam, presented with the kind of packaging that communicates everything about the brand's intended market position without a single word of explanation being required. The images circulated on social media. The PR machinery generated coverage. The lifestyle press picked it up. There was a moment, brief, fragile, but real, when it looked as though American Riviera Orchard might actually be the pivot that the Sussex brand needed. And then, almost nothing. The website launched without any products available for purchase. Read that again because it is important. The website, the primary commercial storefront for this brand that had been announced with considerable fanfare, launched with no products that anyone could actually buy. The brand's social media presence was minimal. The promised product line, the jams and the honeys and the homeware and the wellness range, did not materialize on any commercially meaningful timeline. By the middle of 2024, brand analysts and business journalists who had absolutely no axe to grind, no royal allegiance to protect, no personal investment in seeing Meghan succeed or fail, were asking questions that would have been completely unthinkable 2 years earlier. What exactly is the American Riviera Orchard? Does it have a product? Does it have a business model? Does it have a launch date that anyone is willing to commit to publicly? Does it have a revenue strategy? The answers were not forthcoming, and then came the move that genuinely surprised even those who had been tracking the brand's trajectory most closely. American Riviera Orchard was rebranded. The name was changed. It became As Ever. As Ever. A softer name, a more open-ended name, a name deliberately stripped of geographic specificity, none of the Montecito sunshine, none of the California abundance that the original had promised. A name that critics, quite reasonably, described as a retreat from the boldness that had characterized the original announcement. Now, here is where it gets particularly uncomfortable for anyone who has been cheerleading the Sussex commercial strategy. Because a rebrand of this nature, moving from a specific, evocative, bold name to something more generic and cautious, is not typically the move of a brand that is gaining momentum. It is typically the move of a brand that has encountered resistance it did not anticipate. It is a recalibration, a course correction, an admission, however diplomatically worded, that the original direction was not working quite as intended. The Netflix lifestyle show that accompanied the brand With Love, Meghan launched in early 2025. The reviews were, to put it generously, mixed. Viewership data, which Netflix guards with the kind of secrecy that would make certain members of the British establishment feel quite at home, was not disclosed in any format that allowed independent verification of how the show was actually performing. But you do not need the raw viewership numbers to understand what happened. You need only to look at the cultural response. With Love, Meghan was not a cultural moment. It did not generate the passionate, divisive, unavoidable conversation that the Netflix documentary generated in December 2022. It did not create the water cooler debate, the trending topics, the urgent need to form an opinion that characterizes genuinely resonant content. It aired. It was discussed briefly, and then the news cycle moved on. For a brand strategy constructed entirely on the foundational assumption that Meghan Markle is one of the most talked about, most culturally magnetic, most compulsively watchable women in the world, silence is not merely disappointing. Silence is the worst possible commercial outcome imaginable. And the silence, as 2025 progressed, was becoming increasingly, uncomfortably loud. Now, I need to talk about something that the Sussex strategy never fully accounted for. Something that, in retrospect, represents perhaps the single most significant strategic miscalculation in the entire Sussex commercial playbook. Because the commercial failures are not happening in isolation. They are not happening in a vacuum. They are happening in direct, daily, visible contrast to something that the Sussexes fundamentally underestimated when they made their choices in 2020. They underestimated Kate. Throughout 2024, as Meghan was launching lifestyle brands to muted commercial response and Netflix shows to polite critical shrugs, Catherine, Princess of Wales, who had spent that year navigating the most frightening and genuinely devastating personal circumstances of her life, a cancer diagnosis that she disclosed publicly with extraordinary courage and dignity, was generating a quality of global public sympathy and genuine human affection that no PR team on earth can manufacture, that no brand consultant can engineer, that no content strategy can replicate. Kate's appearance at Wimbledon in June 2024, her first significant public outing following her cancer treatment, was one of the most watched royal moments of the decade. The footage of her receiving a prolonged, spontaneous, completely unrehearsed standing ovation from the crowd was seen by hundreds of millions of people. The emotion in that footage was real. The public response was overwhelming. The coverage was global, and it was warm, and it was the kind of earned, authentic resonance that money genuinely cannot buy. And here is the brutal, unvarnished commercial reality that this contrast illuminates. Meghan left the royal family because she felt, among other things, that she was not being supported, not being protected, not being given the platform and the recognition that her work and her identity deserved within the institution. She left to build an alternative, an independent platform, something of her own. And the alternative, the podcast, the Netflix shows, the lifestyle brand, the carefully curated Montecito content, consistently and measurably generates a fraction of the cultural impact, a fraction of the genuine public engagement, a fraction of the global emotional resonance of a single, quietly powerful appearance by the woman who stayed. Now, I want to be absolutely precise here because this matters. This is not a moral judgment. This is not a statement about who is more deserving, more talented, more admirable as a human being. This is a cold, forensic, dispassionate branding observation. The British royal family, for all of its dysfunction, all of its institutional failures, all of its complicated history, all of its documented struggles with questions of race and representation and relevance, is one of the most powerful brand architectures in the entire history of human civilization. It carries centuries of accumulated cultural weight. It commands an audience of billions. It does not need to market itself because the institution itself is the marketing. The pageantry, the history, the continuity, the ceremony, all of it works as continuous, self-sustaining brand communication that requires no budget line, no content calendar, no partnership strategy. And the Sussex commercial enterprise was built on the assumption, the sincere, genuinely held, commercially understandable assumption that Meghan's individual story, Meghan's individual voice, Meghan's individual identity was sufficiently powerful to compete with that. 2 years of evidence suggests that it is not. The Spotify deal is gone. The podcast audience did not transfer to a new show or a new format in any way that is registered commercially. The lifestyle brand has not established a meaningful, independent market presence that exists separately from the celebrity story surrounding its founder. The Netflix shows generate significant coverage primarily, and perhaps almost exclusively, when they touch on royal drama. And Meghan has repeatedly and publicly stated that she does not want to keep relitigating royal drama, that she wants to move forward, that she wants to build something new. But here is the contradiction at the heart of the entire Sussex commercial strategy, and it is a contradiction that has never been honestly resolved. Without the drama, without the palace, without the tension, without the gravitational pull of the story of the woman who walked away from the crown, who commercially and culturally is Meghan Markle. That is not a cruel question. It is the only question. And it is the question that her brand strategists, her communications advisors, her creative partners are wrestling with in 2025. And it does not yet have a clean, commercially convincing answer. Let us talk about the long game. Because here is where the situation becomes genuinely, fascinatingly complex. Harry and Meghan left the royal family together. They built their commercial strategy together, as a unit, as a partnership, as a single brand entity that the world understood as the Sussexes. Their Netflix deal, their Archwell Foundation, their public identity, and their strategic positioning, all of it has been constructed as a joint enterprise. But as 2025 progresses, something subtle but genuinely significant has become visible to anyone paying close attention. Harry and Meghan's independent commercial trajectories are beginning to diverge. Harry's most credible and consistently beloved independent platform, the Invictus Games, continues to grow. It continues to earn genuine, warm, cross-partisan global coverage. The brand around Invictus is clean, it is purposeful, it is emotionally resonant in ways that have absolutely nothing to do with royal drama, nothing to do with palace briefings, nothing to do with the Sussex exit narrative. The Invictus Games stand on their own. They stand on the stories of wounded veterans reclaiming their lives through sport. They stand on something real and something earned. Meghan's commercial platforms, by contrast, do not yet stand alone in the same way. They have not yet found the independent foundation, the self-sustaining identity, the story that exists completely separately from the royal family story that created the audience for them in the first place. And this divergence creates a tension inside the Sussex partnership that nobody in Montecito is publicly acknowledging. And perhaps nobody is even privately articulating in quite these terms. But it is there. You can see it in the coverage. You can see it in the commercial outcomes. You can see it in the question of who, in the Sussex equation, generates the kind of authentic cultural engagement that lasts beyond a single news cycle. What happens if Harry's independent identity as a veteran advocate, as the founder and figurehead of a games that genuinely transforms lives, proves to be more commercially sustainable, more culturally durable, more independently viable than a lifestyle brand that has not yet found its footing? What happens if the path back to genuine relevance for both Sussexes runs through Harry's credibility rather than Meghan's brand architecture? These are questions about power, about identity, about narrative ownership, about who, in the final analysis, is the story that the world wants to follow beyond the drama of the exit. And there are questions that the next chapter of the Sussex story, whatever form that chapter takes, wherever it is filmed, however it is packaged and distributed and sold to a streaming platform, will have to answer. Because those questions will not wait indefinitely, and the commercial runway, as uncomfortable as this reality is not infinite. The Netflix deal, the memoir advances, the Spotify payment. These were not endlessly renewable resources. They were a window, a specific, time-limited window of commercial opportunity that was opened by one of the most dramatic personal decisions of the 21st century. And that window, like every window, was always going to close. The only question was whether, in the time available, something genuinely sustainable had been built behind it. The evidence of 2024 and 2025 suggests that the answer to that question is not yet yes. And as the window closes, as the original drama recedes further into the past, as the world's attention moves to newer controversies and more urgent stories, as the couple themselves signal repeatedly that they do not wish to keep revisiting the royal family wound that gave their brand its initial commercial power, the Sussexes face a reckoning that is equal parts personal and professional. Who are Harry and Meghan when the royal family is no longer the primary dramatic reference point for everything they do and everything they say and everything they sell? Who are they when the story of the exit has been told so many times in so many formats that the audience has absorbed it entirely and is now waiting for something genuinely new? That is the hardest question in branding. It is also, right now, in this particular moment of 2025, the hardest question inside the House of Sussex. And it is a question to which Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle and Kensington Palace and every senior member of the British royal family have a very quiet, very private, very unspoken interest in the answer. Because the Sussex gamble, the audacious, unprecedented, genuinely historic gamble that you could walk away from the most powerful brand in the world and build something better from scratch, is being resolved in real time. And the institution they left is watching. And the institution, for the moment, is winning. So I put this directly to you because I genuinely want to know what you think. Do you believe that Meghan's commercial brand can survive, can grow, can find genuine, independent cultural traction without the royal family serving as its central dramatic engine? Or has the window already closed? Has the moment already passed? Is the story already settled? Drop your answer in the comments below. Argue your case. Push back if you disagree with my analysis, because I read everything and I engage with the strongest counter-arguments. This is the kind of conversation that this channel exists to have: honest, forensic, unsparing, and willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And if this kind of analysis is what you come here for, if this is the commentary that cuts through the noise and looks at the numbers and the strategy and the long-term trajectory rather than the day-to-day drama, then subscribe now if you have not already done so, because this is topic 5 of 20. And I promise you, the further we go into this series, the more complicated and the more revealing the picture becomes. The Sussex story is not over, not even close. But the shape of how it ends is beginning to become visible. And we are going to follow every twist, every pivot, every strategic recalibration, every commercial decision, with the same unsparing forensic attention that the story demands. Stay with me. This is where it gets really interesting.